Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Laurence Fishburne reaches the event horizon with Osmosis Jones. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Mariani, and I am home.
And I am Adam Thomas, and man, CGI Bill Murray scares the shit out of me.
Yes, so welcome everybody to the Double-Edged Double Bill, in which every week Adam and I talk about a good and a bad feature we pick at the end of the previous episode related to a topic. And this week we decided to do, as a topic, we got another John Wick movie coming out. John Wick Chapter 4, all, I guess, nearly 3 hours of it will be coming out this weekend. And one of the big people in especially the recent sequels, has been Mr. Laurence Fishburne. And you know what? We decided to devote an episode to him because I think it's safe to say we both respect the work of Mr. Fishburne.
Yeah. Laurence Fishburne's he's always been sort of a fun personality, I guess, if you want to put it that way. I'm not necessarily a fan of all of his things he's done, but I am a fan of him.
Yeah, one of those like consummate working actor guys where whenever you see him, it's rare that he's like terrible in a movie, even if it's a terrible movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. How we talked about one of them, where he was actually still kind of fun in the Assault on Precinct 13 remake.
Right, that's true. Or even when he had to pop up in Passengers, for example, another more recent one that we covered. And he's trying, he's trying to do so much with it. But I'm curious, Adam, where was the first place you saw Laurence Fishburne? Because I have a feeling it's the same for both of us.
Um, honestly, it's probably Boys in the Hood for me.
Okay.
If I had to guess. I mean, of course, I'm sure it was Pee-wee, but
That's 100% what it is, I think, for both of us was Pee-wee's
Yeah, I would have
Playhouse.
ever placed him as Cowboy Curtis. So I guess technically Pee-wee, but the first time I took notice of him was probably Boys in the Hood.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like a Pee-wee's Playhouse, at least the first time I knew of him. And I love the story of how apparently he went to audition for Pee-wee's Playhouse, and he auditioned in front of Paul Rubens, and he was doing like a very like serious cowboy, kind of like Clint Eastwood, Man with No Name style performance. And then there was a pause, and Rubens was like, "Lighter?" It's like, oh, like comedy. It's like, right, yeah, let's do that. And then that's how you got Cowboy Curtis.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I don't take into consideration sometimes the age gap between us to where, I firmly grew up with Higher Learning, Boys in the Hood, Deep Cover, Laurence Fishburne.
Well, more of the Larry Fishburne era, as you were.
Yeah, that's true. But it's crazy that, like, you didn't. I have always forget, like, yours would have been the Matrix era, Laurence Fishburne.
Yeah, around more like the Matrix era or so. And I mean, of course, like we mentioned, like he also popped up in so many things in his early career. Like he's in one of the early Death Wish sequels. He's in Nightmare on Elm Street 3. He was a consummate working actor all the way back to there.
Oh, yeah, dude. He's in everything.
And what I really appreciate about him is that he's a guy who you can tell kind of like takes the craft seriously, but at the same time, he also gets kind of like giddy and joyous about it. The great interview I saw with him and Elvis Mitchell, where he was just asked about like, oh, who are your favorite actors? And he just kept listing several credits for like, oh, Peter Lorre in Maltese Falcon, and then also in like this other movie. My favorite being he's talking about Claude Rains in Lawrence of Arabia. And he does a pitch perfect Claude Rains impression, and then he just like starts smacking his hands together. It's like, that's what I'm fucking talking about, right? Like he genuinely loves it on even like that enthusiastic level, and it really shows in his performances.
Oh, yeah. No, you can tell he's a fan of the craft and a fan of sort of the skill of it too. Where I think most actors probably are, but some don't allow the fandom sort of encroach on their talent as well, or sort of influence them as much. And I think he definitely does. I think he definitely likes to show what he loves and talk about what he's really into at the same time.
He hasn't grown jaded about it. Even as much as like he'll do
No,
things
I
for
don't think
paychecks,
so.
it never feels like there's a jadedness like certain actors get to when they're at this point. Like when you see him in the John Wick movies, like I rewatched those recently. In 2 and 3, he is so lively and has such a great presence. Like, give this man a gun. It's so great. It's so fun.
Are you trying to tell me you watched some Laurence Fishburne movies before this episode?
Sometimes I do that. That's true.
Oh man, I'm very curious as to exactly how many it was.
I'll tell you, it wasn't many new ones. It was rewatching a lot of old ones, necessarily. But we're going to be talking about 2 specific movies we picked, like I said, at the end of our last episode, though one of our choices was selected in part by our patrons at patreon.com/DEDBpod. More on that later. And that was my bad pick, which is Osmosis Jones. And then we'll be talking about your good pick of Event Horizon. So let's go ahead and jump into our bad pick then with Osmosis Jones.
A deadly virus, a city at risk, 2 unlikely heroes, and it's all inside this man's body. This summer, we're going into a body under attack from a killer virus.
I'm contagious.
You're busted! Give it up! Oh! Why you hit so hard?
It's the action comedy that gets under your skin,
You have entered the city of Frank.
into your stomach, and up your nose.
Just the way I like it. Extra disgusting.
Please, you're going to make me vomit.
Oh no, not again.
Chris Rock,
You dealing with a white blood cell here.
Molly Shannon,
What a zit. I mean, what is it? What do you want?
Chris Elliott,
Smell.
and Bill Murray.
Hey, have some class, will you?
Oh my god, I've got the giggles.
Osmosis Jones.
Check it out.
So Osmosis Jones came out August 10th, 2001, and is credited to the Farrelly brothers, Bobby and Peter Farrelly. Though we should say that this is a live-action animation hybrid movie, and while they were responsible for the live-action stuff, Piet Kroon and Tom Sido were the animation directors on this. And the big sort of gimmick of this movie is that the titular Osmosis Jones is a white blood cell who lives inside of the Frank character, who is represented in live action, played by Bill Murray. And Bill Murray like eats this egg that literally is like drops inside a monkey cage while he's working at the zoo. And then that it turns out that egg has a deadly virus on it. And whenever we go inside of Bill Murray's body, we see it as an animated like 2D/3D for some of the characters, sort of like police procedural movie, where Osmosis, like I mentioned, is this white blood cell played by Chris Rock, who is part of like the police force that tries to get rid of viruses inside of this body. And this virus, who is Thrax, played by Laurence Fishburne, starts basically trying to melt down Bill Murray's body, tries to kill him within 48 hours. And while he's trying to do that, Osmosis has to team up with this cold pill, who's voiced by David Hyde Pierce, to track him down and get him no matter what sort of issues are going on with like the political machinations of the mayor, who's voiced by William Shatner. And you know, that sounds like an ambitious concept, right? That sounds like a very bizarre idea, and it could end up an interesting movie. And I remember I was attracted to this because I was, when I was younger, I saw this in the theater. I was a kid. And the marketing hook of just like, oh, it's animated live action, still kind of like in the decade plus sort of aftermath of like a Roger Rabbit, I was very interested to see how this worked. And I remember liking it as a kid, but I was very deadly afraid of like, I do not want to revisit this because I'm sure it will not hold up very well. And Adam, I'm sure as someone who has none of that sort of connection to this movie and saw this for the first time, I believe, how did you feel about Osmosis Jones?
Do you just want my final thoughts now? It's fucking boring. It's boring. It's bland. Even the sort of design of the inside of the body is really sort of just not even really excitingly detailed. Like it all kind of just looks the same. Maybe the character design is pretty awful for the most part. It's just, and oh, he's so unhealthy because he eats fried chicken and he eats an egg or whatever. I mean, granted, the egg fell out of the chimp's mouth. Probably shouldn't eat it,
No.
but still, oh, look how gross he is. Oh, he's gonna vomit on her. Oh, his pimple's gonna blow onto her lip. Like it's just a bunch of really dumb, gross out humor mixed with just kind of boring animation.
I can at least say this much, that there's the whole issue where, like, when they were making this movie, the animation stuff went into production long before the live action stuff, and you can really feel that, because despite the sort of the connection of, like, really disgusting sort of puns and stuff when he's inside the body, and you hear a lot of, like, puns about, like, oh, the gastrointestinal, like, tract is kind of like an airport and shit like that, that could be clever, I guess, if they just didn't do the one bit over and over again with, like, any of these puns. But, like, even that stuff at least feels like it's trying to be more creative than, like, all the live action stuff is incredibly disgusting. And, like, the Farrelly brothers were known at this time for doing, like, gross out humor, but literally every single scene when it's live action is either trying to do the most disgusting gross out comedy, or occasionally trying to wring some kind of emotion out of it with, like, Bill Murray and his daughter, who is, like, trying to get him to be healthy, and it all rings so hollow. And so it makes all the stuff when in the animated world even less interesting, because it's like, why do I give a shit if Frank lives? Because Frank just seems like an asshole who cares about nothing except eating gross food.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And it's like they set up something, where obviously he's a widower and, her mom died and blah, blah, and the little girl has resentment towards him for that and everything. You don't care, though. They don't do anything with it. They don't do it. Like, that's the thing. Even with as bland and sort of boring as I kind of find the whole thing, if they would have just kicked up a notch in either area, either the live action or the animation, but I feel like especially the live action part, you'd care. But no, you get Kid Rock.
We'll talk about the Kid Rock thing. There's a lot to the weird Kid Rock thing in this movie. This very early 2000s movie. That's another thing. This movie feels supremely, like, pre-9/11 2001 specifically, where it could have really only had, like, the soundtrack, the celebrity cameos, the pop culture references, all feel very specifically of that time. The live action stuff especially is interesting when you consider, like, the Farrelly brothers, for, like, whatever you might think of their movies, I think at their best, their sort of gross out comedies did have some kind of heart to them. It feels like because they're only responsible for, like, I don't know, about 40% of the movie with all the, like, live action stuff, they have to, like, really truncate some kind of, like, emotional arc or connection with any of these things, or even, like, any of the actual gross out gags. They feel, like, really labored to where, like, oh, we're about to have a vomit scene and we have to build up just this vomit scene. We don't actually have anything about the character, which, like I said, say what you will about the other movies, but, like, at least before, say, Jeff Daniels has explosive diarrhea in Dumb and Dumber, like, I know who that character is. So that makes it, like, a bit funnier, as opposed to, like, Frank is a nothing of a character except just, like, a fat slob, so then he just, like, vomits everywhere. It's, like, it's even more truncated than those, like, very slim premises of those other movies that those guys did were.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, most of Kingpin is gross out humor. Well, at least there's a lot of it.
Right.
Just with, yeah, but yet it's funny and you kind of want, like, Woody Harrelson to succeed. And even when you do get to the Bill Murray of it all, and he's such a scumbag, and then there's stakes, oh my God, he's such a good bowler, blah, blah, blah. This is just, he farts and he throws up and he's got a zit that they show pulsating. Oh, his brother's Chris Elliott. He's gross too. Oh, yeah, this is good, right? Like you said, it's about 40%, maybe 40% of the movie, if not a little less. And the whole idea, like you said, you want Osmosis Jones and whatever the hell the pill name is, I forget his name, Drix or whatever.
Drix.
You want them, yeah, you want them to save where they live and save their environment, and you want everything to be successful. But then, like you said, if you take a second, realize, oh, it's Bill Murray's body. Gives a fuck. He's a slob, terrible father
who goes to restaurants and insists that he's barefoot so he has, like, his ingrown toenail on the table.
I know, it's so gross. Like, it's just gross to be gross. And I've never found that funny. Like you said, the Farrelly brothers have always done that in most of their movies, to varying levels, degrees of success. I'd say probably the most successful bit is the fucking cum in the hair in Something About Mary. It's probably the most famous bit they've ever done. And when you first see it, it's funny. Does it hold up? Well, no. But There's nothing in this that even comes close to that level of like, oh my god, that is gross. Look how funny. It's just gross and stupid and really kind of just done for no reason.
Yeah, and all that live action stuff obviously makes like I mentioned, the motivations of the animated characters not work as well. But even then, like, I'm not necessarily as harsh on necessarily the design of all the characters in the sort of inside of Frank's body. I like the basic look of sort of like what Osmosis and all the other sort of cells are. There's like a translucentness to them, and even that like Osmosis can like transform himself. That's probably like the best visual gag of the movie, is that he can do that.
Yeah, I don't mind the various character designs. I just think the world they're living in is bland and boring. Like it's either shades of green or shades of pink, and that's
Right.
it.
And it's also like very much like one-dimensional like puns about where they
Yeah.
are. And just
Yeah.
like, oh, white blood cell equals police force, and they don't do like a lot to really expand on that or make it at all clever. Like there's a bit where there's a high-speed chase and there's a billboard that says visit the land down under, and it's a big picture of Frank's butt with a kangaroo next to it. Right. I mean, for young Thomas found that hysterical.
Oh well, sure, of course.
Obviously, yes. But that's the thing, is it's also so weird for this movie where it's like, it is intentionally like a kid's movie, but there's a lot more like upsetting stuff that's all about, and like at least puns that like I don't even think an adult would scoff at and a kid won't get. And then other like weird things. Like I will say, I think easily the best part of this movie, it's not just because he's our subject, but I think Thrax has the best design, and I think is a genuinely like well animated villain, and I think Fishburne's vocal performance is pretty good, but he's also like extremely like upsetting, to the point where like a young kid would be very disturbed by, say, the first scene where he kills like the cleanup crew and they like fucking explode basically. It's so weird, just like I don't know who this is really for.
Yeah, no, I mean I have to agree with you. He's probably the most fully realized character that. Yeah, he's scary. He reminds me, like, to me, I could see what you're saying. Like a kid would find him scary. To me, it's like I remember when I saw like All Dogs Go to Heaven, and there's the giant like Satan dog at the end,
Yes.
and you're like, what the fuck is this? Like that, I could see that being sort of this character. Um, yeah, he's having a good time. His vocal performance is pretty fun. I like the finger that infects everything and rips everything apart. Like you said, melts the other characters and stuff. Yeah, he's pretty great. I wish that anybody else was even half as memorable.
Yeah, because the main sort of crux of the animated stuff is Osmosis, it's the first Chris Rock vocal performance, and if you've seen one of those, like in a Madagascar movie or anything, you've seen all of them.
Yep.
It's very much the origin of like the zebra from the Madagascar movies, where he's just like, I'm Chris Rock talking in the exact Chris Rock dialect, to the degree that there's a point where like he even does like an elaborate Chris Rock style stand-up bit, like he does in any one of the movies that he's in, about like, oh, I used to live in Crack Central. I mean, literally the crack of the butt, and then he does several jokes about living in the crack. And like Drix is like, oh, I'm gonna vomit, and then you got David Hyde Pierce just doing like Niles, but as like an efficient cold pill. It's like, and they don't have any like actual dynamic that's interesting.
No, yeah, it is 100% a Chris Rock stand-up bit. And I mean, can I ask, how lazy? I mean, hey, Brandy. I mean,
Yes, right.
what is that about? Why? I'm very curious if that was a fuck up, and they were just like, "Ah, leave it."
Right. For context, everybody, one of the characters in here, the female love interest, is played by Brandy. And she does like the vocal performance. Her name's Leah. And there's a point when like before Osmosis is about to be fired, where like he walks into the chief's office, and you can hear off camera Osmosis saying, Brandy, I mean Leah, what are you doing here? And I don't know if it's a fuck up or it's Chris Rock who was like fucking with everybody. It's like, this is a joke, right? And then just kept that in. It completely breaks the weird reality of the movie.
100%. It makes no sense at all. I will say, and to get to it, just because again, anything kind of pop culture-y, we're going to throw in this at the time or the year this came out. Seeing a germ sort of version of Kid Rock, Joe C, and Uncle Kracker is fucking ridiculous.
But not like a fun ridiculous. It's just more.
No, it's not good. No, it's not a good ridiculous. It's really just sort of like, oh god.
Well, actually, I'm sorry. You mispronounced his name. It's Kidney Rock, because this is
right.
different.
Sorry. Yeah.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
And they're performing at a nightclub that's in the Zit.
Yeah.
So that's really clever.
Yeah. It's a pop-up nightclub.
Right, because they say it's like a new spot that just opened up in the forehead. It's the zit. It's really clever. And I'm sorry to keep talking about Kid Rock, because I would not want to in normal circumstance. But I just want to point out, they sing a song called Cool Daddy Cool, like when they go into that club in the zit, and it's Josie and him performing this song. And they cut off at a certain point, and then if you listen to like the actual whole song, there's a bit they cut out, and I'm going to quote this. These are the lyrics verbatim. It says, young ladies, I like 'em underage, see. Some say that's statutory, but I say it's mandatory. That song is on the soundtrack for this movie that was directly marketed toward children.
They probably had a tie-in with Subway restaurants, too.
Or like McDonald's kids meals, I'm sure.
Yep. Fuck Kid Rock.
Yep.
Fuck Subway.
Even before he turned out to be the massive piece of shit that he is now, he was a piece of shit long ago. Always awful.
He's always been awful.
Yep.
He's awful. He's never been good.
I don't care how much you ball with the ball.
Hey, well, hold on, though. I will give credit only for when Ball to Ball came out, it was kind of like a banger for like a couple months. And then you hear it in everything, and I'm like, all right, enough of this. And then every song that came out afterwards is just, it's Ball to Ball again. Oh, it's Ball. Wait, why is he country music now? Who is this dirtbag? Yeah, he's a fucking piece.
He's close personal friends with one of our former presidents, sir. How dare you?
Oh, yeah, he's also been seen by several members of my family and friends at random parties back in the day because he's around from where I live. And he's just passed out drunk on couches and shit.
Shocking.
Big shocker. God, fuck Kid Rock. Fuck it. We got to save it, though, for our Kid Rock episode.
Oh, boy. I can't wait to talk about Joe Dirt and what else was he in?
I guess we got to talk about Torque again.
Oh, right. Like we said, this movie's like so supremely dated in 2001 to the degree that you also have a bunch of other pop culture references. Like they do a Matrix bullet time bit with Laurence Fishburne versus Chris Rock's character.
Yep.
Right? Isn't that funny? Didn't you laugh at that?
So funny. Even though with the pop culture references, it still feels like if you were to tell me this came out after the Matrix, I'd be like, no way. It feels dated like instantly. I guess that's one of the main problems too because the Matrix seems sort of timeless in a weird way. But I guess that's sort of the problem with doing all these pop culture references and all this bullshit in movies. You instantly date your movie. Like instantly. There's no way. Like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you throw on Who Framed Roger Rabbit right now, and yeah, there's a couple old school references, but it's done so fucking well, and the movie's also set in that time period. Where this, it's like, this is just, it's early 2000s junk. It'll never be nothing but early 2000s junk. If I were to show this to my kid, like I'm not going to, but say in a couple years I show this to her, she's not going to know what any of these references are. I mean, it's good, but she would have no idea what the hell's going on. No clue.
No, probably not. No, unless you maybe showed her the Matrix at some point in between. She's like, oh, that's a Matrix thing, right? And like that may be the only one.
Maybe, but then Kid Rock, I'm like, never mind. Never mind on that one.
I don't know Kid Rock. I know Kidney Rock, famous germ star.
Yeah. There's this real dirtbag who came out and like impersonated him in real life. Just pay attention to Kidney Rock, but don't listen to the whole fucking song.
No, don't listen to the whole song. Do not buy that. Do not buy that soundtrack.
Oh, God.
But yeah, I think a big thing is that like this is the same summer as Shrek. And that's a movie that also has plenty of like very dated pop culture references in there. But weirdly, that one is at least like continued on, I think, mainly because of like the weird meme-ish quality, I guess, of Shrek as a figure.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Right. And at the very least, and even then, like I remember like watching this at the time and at least liking the animated parts, but at the same time thinking like, well, this isn't going to be like constantly rewatched like I am with Shrek. Like I had that VHS at this point.
How old were you when you saw this?
I would have been 9.
Oh, yeah, that's right up. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, you're probably saying,
I'm not going to watch this as much as the Ingmar Bergman Seven Seals. Unless this is put out on Criterion, Daddy.
Then he just, shut up, Thomas!
Even at that point, before all the cool kids were into Criterion.
Yeah, you were totally into it. 100%.
Can I get their Wazer discs? They're half off.
Do you think Kid Rock studied the Stanislavski method?
Very sure he's a very committed actor. Have you seen Joe Dirt? I did around this time. Of course he would have been.
Of course. Where he plays himself? Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, like that's the thing is like this was definitely a piece of very disposable entertainment, and it's weird, especially considering like this is I believe one of the last examples of like Warner Brothers animation movies, because this was around the time like post Iron Giant, an amazing movie that did not do very well and helped like nearly destroy that studio. Post sort of like the Disney Renaissance, every studio won an animation arm. It's like, look, we gotta compete with Disney, we gotta do something with it. And like the Warner Brothers stuff, it's a bummer because at least it feels like they were trying to do like more genre focused stuff, and then like those bombs in a row really killed it.
Well, they still do stuff. Like they did the new Mortal Kombat animated movies. They've done some of the DC stuff. Like
right, but those are all like direct to video, as opposed to like, directly
true.
competing with like Disney in theaters. It's like that really didn't happen again until they started doing like the Lego movies. Really,
one of them.
Well, actually, two of them: the Lego Batman and Lego movie.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as like being huge successes, Lego Batman did alright. Lego Movie 2 and Ninjago, on the other hand,
no, they did not do very well. Yes,
no.
And it's a bummer because like even some of those other recent ones, like Storks, I thought was fun. Like some of those that they did were pretty solid. But yeah, it's a shame that like this is around the time where it feels like, oh, we're not gonna bother with like competing with Disney, unless animation becomes sort of like singular, where it's like it's a Disney or it's like a DreamWorks. And even then, DreamWorks has started fading in recent years. So yeah, we can blame Osmosis Jones for killing diversity in animation.
Fuck you, Osmosis Jones. I blame Kid Rock.
I mean, anything he touches turns to trash.
Pure shit.
Yeah.
Pure shit. Cigarette butts and couch farts.
Was there anything in Osmosis Jones that made you laugh at all, Adam?
Nope, not once. I cannot be 100% honest. I did not laugh once. There was a lot of groans. I definitely did a lot of, oh, God. But, yeah, no, I can honestly, I didn't laugh at all.
I'll say that, like, I think the only bits of laughter I really got were from the sort of the weird subplot they have here with, like, William Shatner plays the mayor of Frank's body, and he's in an election sort of cycle with this other germ who's played by Ron Howard. And I kind of laughed at his campaign ad, particularly where there's a point where the little kid boy comes up. Yeah, it's just like, what's the smell? That, Jimmy? And he turns his head around all the way. Is the future. It's the smell.
Yeah, what was he like? Tom Kalanick or something like that?
Right, Tom Kalanick, yeah.
Yeah.
That was kind of funny. And then also, there is actually a bit with, we didn't mention her much, but Molly Shannon appears in the live action segments as Bill Murray's daughter's teacher. And there's a bit where after there's a whole thing where he throws up on her and it becomes like local news. It gets him fired and gets her embarrassed. And like he's trying to go on this hike with his daughter with the school. And he's trying to convince Molly Shannon to get rid of their restraining order because he vomited all over her. And she's just like, I can't believe, like, do you know how embarrassing that was for me and my entire family? My sons Ralph and Chuck had to deal with so much turmoil. I thought Molly Shannon sold like that line. I thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah. I was tuned out a little bit.
I mean, to be fair, it was like, I was looking for an oasis of jokes at that point. That's like near the end of the movie at that point.
Oh, yeah. No, you're looking for the proverbial ha-ha needle.
Yes.
Like, for sure. Yeah, you're looking for anything. I completely understand. I was too, in a way. I just definitely couldn't find anything.
You gave up on the search by that point.
Yeah, pretty much. I remember this being, sort of a flop and a joke and everything. And I was a little bit after my time when I would have wanted to see something like this. Like I always loved animation, but this just didn't look interesting to me at the time. So, going back to it this morning, I didn't expect really anything out of it. Like, maybe it'll be surprised. And it never took off for me. Not once did it really pick my interest. Like Laurence Fishburne was cool when he came on screen. I will say the movie got a little bit better when he was sort of in it. But other than that, like you said, you could close your eyes and listen to Chris Rock's vocal performance, and you could be watching Madagascar and performing on a late night show where he can't swear. It just didn't work.
Right, and saying things like, what the Frank? There's other like really bad puns in here that I'm not gonna mention because
No.
they're just like exhausting. Yeah, but those sound like pretty good final thoughts, Adam. I think you're pretty exhausted. I'll talk
10 out of
about
10.
Osmosis Jones. 10 out of 10, great movie.
10 out of 10, great movie.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this definitely, it's like I said, I had some, at least, like, attachment to this when I was a kid. It's like, oh, that was kind of weird and interesting. I remember there was a cartoon show that I watched a couple episodes of when I was a kid that was like a spin-off of this directly, and some other things like that. But, yeah, going back to it, it feels supremely of its time in, like, all of the worst ways. I think there's a couple bits of animation I think kind of work. I will say, I kind of like, this is one of the examples like Iron Giant or even some of the other like Disney movies around this time where they have, it's mostly 2D, but they have a couple of CG things like Drix even is like kind of a CG, like with heavy outlines to kind of fit the style. I like that style of animation. I kind of like that meld of the two. But this is still at the same time the lesser version of it because it feels just like a lot more like low rent. Even when those two characters are together, there's no, like, authentic chemistry. I think maybe because of that animation style is so, like, different from, like, the 2D stuff, and it doesn't really work nearly as well. And, yeah, like, all the live-action stuff really deflates any of the kind of, like, fascination you could get out of, like, oh, it's like that great Roger Rabbit meld. Like, so many movies try to chase that in the era, like I said, like, the decade after Roger Rabbit came out. And this was, like, at the tail end of that. And it feels so much just like, oh yeah, we're going to kind of maybe capture that magic, but through gross out jokes and really bad puns and celebrity voice actors that aren't really that interested for the most part, except for Fishburne. Like I mentioned, any scene with Fishburne is immediately much more interestingly animated and enjoyable than anything else here. So kudos to Fishburne for that. But let's talk about our good movie now of Event Horizon.
After 7 years in deep space.
There were 18 people on board this ship when it disappeared. I want them all accounted for.
Opening outer door.
It came back, abandoned.
Any crew? Negative. This place is a tomb.
But it didn't come back alone.
Captain Miller! I've got some problems here!
This ship has been beyond the boundaries of our universe. Who knows where it's been and what it's brought back with it.
Vacate. I want off this ship.
You can't leave. She won't let you. God help us.
So Event Horizon came out August 15th, 1997 from director Paul W.S. Anderson, who we haven't really talked about on the show that much. I believe the only one of his movies we've covered is Alien vs. Predator.
And I'm good with that.
Well, I mean, he has Paul and Anderson in his name. I mean, that inherently means he has a lot of talent.
That's true. He did. No, he's not good.
I mean, I wouldn't mind talking about at least some of the Resident Evil movies I find to be a bit more interesting. Like,
I would do that for like a bad choice and stuff. I could see that for sure, but
I don't know, I would say I kind of like the one of his I really like is I believe it's the fifth one. Mila Jovovich is like her mind's been erased and she's like living in like a weird like like suburbia and she like breaks out of it. I like that one. I think
were they like underwater and stuff like that?
I believe, yeah, that also is the underwater one. I mean, the best one of those is the one he didn't direct, the third one in Vegas with like all the desert stuff.
Russell
Highlander
Mulcahy.
guy.
Yeah, Russell
Right,
Mulcahy.
yeah. That one's the best one. But anyway, that's a discussion for a different day, because we're talking about Event Horizon, which many would say is his best film. Adam, given this is your good pick, would you say that's the case with Event Horizon?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, it's definitely his best film. Don't get me wrong, we talked about it. I like the movie, but it's a better version of Hellraiser Bloodlines. This is basically Hellraiser in space.
Yeah, I would say I do like this movie. I would agree it's his best movie. But you still see a lot of sort of his stylistic flourishes that I'm not a fan of. I think particularly as we get to like the ending of the movie, there's a lot of those. And I feel like this is definitely one where if you're unaware of Event Horizon, like basically as Adam said, it is sort of like a Hellraiser in space. It follows this crew who is sent to try and rescue the Event Horizon, the titular spaceship, which has been lost for about a decade since this ship like went missing entirely and its entire crew, and then it suddenly shows up back up on the beacon So this crew, who is led by Laurence Fishburne, brings along the specialist who's played by Sam Neill. And
yeah,
they
he
go,
designed it. He
designed
designed
it. Yes, he designed the ship and everything, and his wife was lost on the ship and stuff like that. They board it, and instantaneously things start getting weird and horror-driven. Evidence that they find indicates that, like, they open basically a portal into a hell dimension through this like big black hole that powers the ship in the center. I will say that I think this movie's one where I'd heard about it for so long, and I watched it maybe about like a decade ago for the first time. This movie has a lot of interesting ideas, and has so much potential. And I think the first 2/3 especially are like really creepy and atmospheric and play on a lot of that stuff very well. The last third, I think, goes bonkers in ways that I do enjoy, but also in plenty of ways that feel, oh, this was hastily rushed together. And as it turned out, yes, because they had to edit the fuck out of this movie. We'll talk about that in a second. But you can kind of feel it during that last third, I would argue.
Definitely. I mean, I've been a fan of this movie since I saw it, and I probably saw it right around when it came out. I don't think I saw it at the theater, but probably right after on home rental release. And yeah, I remember really, really loving the first 2/3. It was so creepy, and the hallucinations and the set design. The set design is great in this movie. The way everything looks is really cool, and there's the sort of what happens to Jason Isaacs and all that when they like you're like fuck what the, and then the last third becomes like an action movie basically. And there's also a lot with, I don't know his name, but he's like one of the crew members, the only other black guy in the crew, where he becomes comedic relief.
You're talking about Richard T. Jones as Cooper.
That's it, Richard T. Jones. Yes. Like, why does Sam Neill evolve, like go through evolutions in this? Like, he's regular Sam Neill, and then he's ripped out eyes, but you can still see Sam Neill, and then he's basically Pinhead without the pins.
His sort of like transformation in his mind, where like we initially are introduced to him as he like has a bad dream about his wife, her eyes are cut out, and then he like wakes up like, oh my god, and he has to literally like go over to the photo and it's like, I miss you. We couldn't tell from the shrine that he missed his wife, maybe, at all. But yeah, like that weird thing where like he already has those dreams, but then those dreams keep like occurring when he's on the ship, and that's what makes him possessed. It's weird. I'm not sure exactly how like that transformation, like where that clicks necessarily, or if he was always crazy. It feels like they want to try and imply that maybe he was like on the ship originally, and that maybe got lost in like a draft or the edit.
Maybe, or it influenced him to build the ship to begin with.
Right.
Like, so he has some kind of mental connection to the ship, something like that. Yeah, they don't really go far with it. But, whatever. It doesn't, okay.
I mean, but at the same time, like, Sam Neill is having a lot of fun. Even, like, during that last third, where it goes crazy, he, like, really embraces the crazy of it, particularly when he has no eyes. And he's, like, sitting in that ship, and then he, like, rises up. He's so fun.
I think most people in this movie are really doing their best. You know, not necessarily, like, their best work they've ever done, but they're really doing what they can with it. I think Fishburne's great. I love Sean Pertwee. Jason Isaac's really fun. Even though Jason Isaac, like, why cover his accent? I don't understand, but whatever. Because he's not good at it. But
especially when you have Julie Richardson doing her normal, like, British accent. Just have a bunch of British people on the ship.
Sean Pertwee's.
Yes.
What is he, British or Scottish? Whatever he is. Like, just let him do his accent. I still think everyone's pretty fun in it. It's the best what's his name place Justin's ever been in anything.
Jack Noseworthy?
Yeah.
A guy who I'm convinced was a Chris Kattan, like, character who wasn't actually a person.
Right, he's Mango in real life.
Right. Like, he's a weird Tony Clifton character for fucking Chris Kattan. It's like, no, this was a completely separate person.
Yeah. Jack Noseworthy of MTV Dead Like Me fame. I think that was his big thing, or something like that. Dead at 17. Some bullshit. You know, for the flaws that are in this, I think, like I said, the set design's great, and it is a pretty great ensemble. Like, Fishburne is fun in this. I think he's a good sort of opposing force to Sam Neill.
Right, he's sort of he's believable as sort of the captain of this vessel, who's trying to like actually save
no
his crew.
Nonsense, no bullshit captain. We're getting the job done, and we're going.
And even when he wants to be vulnerable later on, when he talks about the one guy that he couldn't save, who got like completely engulfed in fire, he really sells the emotion of that, which is really crucial, because when we get to like see the horrible like ghost vision of that guy who's just like, you let me burn, I'm like, okay.
Oh, it's so stupid.
This is so bad. Why
it's so dumb. I want to see more of that blood orgy fuck scene. what is going on in there? Like, I know there's more that was filmed and all that stuff, but that's the most disturbing part of the movie for me.
Yeah, that was the thing. This movie was originally about 2 hours, 10 minutes long. And they tested it with, like, this longer cut that had a lot more of the gore stuff in, like, the orgy scene, and throughout there was a lot more, like, upsetting sort of images there. And it did not test very well. So Anderson was forced to cut this down to 96 minutes. And apparently a lot of that footage was lost because they were storing the negatives, like, in a salt mine, is what they said, like in, like, Romania or something,
Like
and it wasn't very well kept.
Like,
I know.
Day of the Dead. Yeah, what the fuck?
That's where Day of the Dead you can find, like, look, it's the Lost Event Horizon footage. But apparently, so they can't restore that, so there will never be, like, a director's cut of this movie, necessarily, because that negative is destroyed. Actually, honestly, my favorite moment of this movie is sort of, like, speaking of cutting off, like, that gore scene, is the bit where Fishburne, like, is watching along with everybody else after they decoded everything, and they see the flashes of that orgy that happened with the previous crew, and then the timing of him turning it off, beat, we're leaving, is, like, the comedic high point of the movie for me. We're just like, we're gone. We're not staying on this place a fucking second longer. Because you're just with him in the way of, like, that horror movie cliche of, like, get out of the house, get out of the spaceship in this case. Fishburne's just like, fuck it. I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, right. It's funny as hell, but at the same time, like, fuck yeah, dude, get the fuck on. Like, nah. If I saw a video like that and they're screaming Latin and ripping each other's guts out through the mouth and whatever the hell else is going on, nah, I'm gone, dude. I'm leaving. We're done. We're done here.
I mean, even when you walk onto the ship, which the big thing with the design here is, like, we have that initial ship that's very much sort of like a typical ship you'd see in, like, Alien, where it's, like, very dirty and dingy, and they go into the Event Horizon, and it's literally designed after, like, the Notre Dame Cathedral, so it looks, like, ethereal and massive, and, like, the contours everywhere.
Yeah, almost like a crucifix, where there's, like, a sort of stand-in stained glass with sort of the green glass and all that stuff. Like, it's
that
really...
big hallway feels very much like sort of a big arch of a church and stuff like that. It does look immaculate, but also, the moment I went onto that ship, I would be like, this place looks like a spooky place. I don't want to be here.
Yeah, I don't like this. Yeah, this is the core. Oh, good lord, we're getting the fuck out of here. This giant room, the sphere and blinking lights, and you got to go down like one of those carnival tunnels to get to it. Why would you design it like this? Let's get the fuck out of here.
Well, ask Sam Neill if he hasn't torn out his eyes yet.
Got too many brandies and elephant ears. I was low.
So I'm curious, Adam, like, in the subgenre of space horror, which we haven't talked about, like, that much. Like, we've talked about Hellraiser 4, and we've talked about some of the Alien movies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what do you think is sort of the key to making, like, a space horror movie like this work?
For me, like, the only really successful space horror with aliens is the Alien sort of franchise. Can't think of many other ones where I'm like, oh, that was really good and effective, where it actually takes place in space. I'm not talking about an alien coming to Earth, but when that takes place in space. I think the best way to do them is have it be something otherworldly or undiscovered, like the Hell Dimension, or even can you get into Lovecraftian type things or things like that. I think that's when it really works, because it is in a completely uncharted, undiscovered space. So to add in completely new elements, unknown, unheard of elements of fear, I think is what makes it work the best.
So very Lovecraftian, as it were.
Lovecraftian or even psychological, to me, work better than just a sort of entity of a creature.
No, I get that. I think that is a big thing with, like, because whenever you see, like, sort of like space horror, like, there were plenty of those, especially post-Alien. Plenty of, like,
so many, like Creature, Leviathan. Well, Leviathan was underwater, but still.
Well, and even, like, there were other ones that were even more, like, sci-fi driven, that had, like, Saturn 3, ones like that, where it's, like, it's a bit more low budget, and they're kind of dealing with it. It feels less like Alien and more like an older sci-fi movie from, like, the 50s or 60s, just done in, like, 1982 or whatever. But I think that's the thing, is that I agree with you that there kind of has to be that mixture of, like, going out into space, the unknown, the final frontier, but also, like, what you discover in the final frontier is upsetting and horrible, and you can't even, like, fathom what's going on here. And I think this movie is one of the, I agree, the better ones to, like, kind of get close to that territory. But then again, I think you have to have that balance, I think, of, like, that sci-fi element and that horror element. And I think the biggest trouble with, like, the ending is it goes way more into the horror and also even the action element that wasn't really there And like that completely like depletes, I think, that sort of like balance we had earlier on.
I think, yeah, I see. It's not even me them going too far into the horror element. Like if they would have just said "fuck it," now it's a straight up crazy horror movie. Like okay, I mean, it still would have maybe been tonally jarring, but I think them adding in the third element now of action, where like you said, it really wasn't an action movie; it was a sci-fi horror movie, and then for them to go, well, now it's an action movie. It just kind of you feel like you're almost like following a new group of characters.
It would kind of be like if the ending of Alien suddenly became like the ending of Aliens. And it's like,
Right,
wait, we're
exactly.
getting rid of like the sci-fi stuff. What are we doing?
Yeah, no, exactly. Right. And this one kind of I think that's this one's biggest flaw. To where all of a sudden they're shooting guns and having fist fights and throwing bombs and there's a dude on fire. You not me, bird, which is so dumb.
And also throwing punches with like the worst stock punch sound effects ever.
Oh, it's bad. Oh yeah. Yeah, like,
or especially when like Fishburne picks up that one like tube thing and starts like, get off of my ship, and it like literally sounds like he's hitting him with like a plastic bat. It's like bonk, bonk, bonk.
Yeah. I was expecting to pick it up and it goes yeah, no, it's really bad footage. Well, that's like you said, that's how you could tell it was rushed, where they had to edit it down and change it and cut new things in to make it more exciting at the end, and that way it gives people a sense of, oh hell yeah. And then this movie also, I hate the fake scare out at the end with Jolie Richardson and the guy with the Sam Neill under the space helmet bullshit. I really, really hate that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the best sort of mix of like the sci-fi and the horror is the whole scene that centers around Jack Noseworthy, where he's been possessed and he puts himself in the airlock. I think it's like such a perfectly timed scene, and also has like that great mix of like there's the sci-fi tension but also the horror element of like, especially when he's starts opening up the airlock and then he wakes up out of his trance. He's just like, wait, what am I doing here? What's happening? What's going on? That is incredibly effective.
Oh yeah, dude. And then he goes out to space, his eyes explode. Like, that's awful. That's pretty terrible.
And Fishburne is like rushing up in like space to like try and save him.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most effective bit. I think so. That, and I think one of my favorite sort of bits with the hallucination is where she keeps seeing her daughter. Or her son.
Right. We start seeing her son, right? And he's like, has deformed legs and stuff like that.
Yeah, she's chasing him around and then she falls down that fucking pit. That one's pretty good too. I like the hallucination stuff. I like the stuff in the tunnel where they're in the neon green vent and he's trying to fix something and then the wife's down there. Like there's a lot of really effective sort of close quarters psychological horror in this. Like they really do a good job. But like you said, and I think it is the truth, and I think that might be maybe why this movie didn't find a huge audience. Like it's got an audience. People really do like this.
There's a cult sort of audience for this movie.
Yeah, it's not as big as it could have been. And I think a lot of it has to do with maybe older genre fans, maybe that are our age now and everything, seeing it for the first time back then and being like, why did this turn into an action movie at the end? I think this movie really stuck around with the younger audience, teenagers and stuff, in maybe early 20s, like people like how I would have been. And I think those are the ones who really sort of champion it to this day.
It's definitely like an extremely flawed movie, but you want to like hang on to like the stuff that really works about it. Like that's the thing is like I think it works as much because like those first 2/3 of like the atmospheric build-up feel way less like a modern Paul W.S. Anderson movie. And that last third feels like it's a bit more in that range, but because of like that goodwill that was built up before, and then also I agree the consistency of all the actors is really like what I think holds this together by like glue and scotch tape, quite frankly, as like the ending starts happening. Like even as much as he has to do like some dumb shit by the end of that movie, Fishburne is also very committed to like, I guess I gotta sell this, even though I don't know how we got here. But sure, I guess I'll blow up the ship and say like, yes, I did hear you. Boo. Like so
yeah, bad. Right. Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, he's fully on board. Like that's the thing. He's fully on board 100% of the way. I guess that's kind of alludes to what we were talking about before we even got to our first movie. Like that's one thing you can rely on him for. Like if he's committed, he's fully committed. Because there are certain movies and certain performances. I can't think of it, like Bobby Z and shit like that, where it's like he doesn't want to be there. You could tell. Maybe he signed on for a different movie and it changed while he was doing it. It's just not as good as he can be. Maybe never feels like he's phoning it in, but you can tell he's not fully committed. In this, he's committed. Like he's like, I'm going to make this work. as best as I can.
During that Elvis Mitchell interview I mentioned earlier, there was a bit where he talks about like what he sort of feels like is like when I really get into a role, I call it getting into the swing of something. I call it like, because he alludes it to like whenever like a composer like composes a piece of music and he's like conducting, and then at a certain point he'll stop conducting and just starts dancing. That's what he wants out of every single performance he does. And Elvis Mitchell asks him about like, so what about if like someone else isn't in the swing of things? Like you want like an actor who's kind of in the swing with you. What if they aren't? And he's just like, what can you do? I just try and keep swinging. And I think that's like key to his like performances, is that he tries, even if other people aren't trying around him. It's just like, well, I'll swing without you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to do it. Although Lydia Tarr doesn't dance during which she's orchestrated. She does.
Well, then she's not really committed to the craft anymore. She's more committed to doing horrible things on the side.
Horrible things. She's a monster. But yeah, I think I could agree with that. Fishburne, maybe he is sometimes where it's just the material around him doesn't work. But yeah, he's pretty much always consistent. He's a pretty fucking cool dude, man. That's what it is. That's what it is about Laurence Fishburne. He seems like a cool fucking dude.
I mean, that's what even sold him like as Morpheus. Is that as much as he was also like a wise dude who was teaching you all these things, he also seemed just like really fucking cool while he was doing it.
Yeah.
Like,
well, we're like, dude, the dad in Boys in the Hood, you're like, he's fucking cool, man. That's how smart he is and shit. Like, he's fucking cool. He's this young, cool dad. Yeah, get him. You better stop Cuba Gooding from really bad shadow boxing.
Well, Adam, it seems like we're kind of diverging away from Event Horizon. Do you have any final thoughts on Event Horizon?
Like I said, it's basically Hellraiser in space, but in a good way. Better than Bloodlines, even though I do like Bloodlines. But I just think it's a really fun sci-fi horror movie. It's just too bad that it becomes a sci-fi horror action movie in the last third. If it didn't do with that, I think this movie would be a lot more fondly remembered and maybe looked upon. But as it is what we have. I think it's a strong movie. I think it's very well acted, especially by sort of our main two leads, which is Sam Neill and Fishburne. I think they work well off of each other, especially when the shit hits the fan. I think there's a lot of fun bits. Yeah, I just think it's a pretty solid movie, and it's easily the director's best.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can tell there's been at least some influence with this movie, I'll say, given the one bit where Sam Neill has to explain about sort of like that time lapsing through the fabric of space using the magazine, and you're like, I wonder if Christopher Nolan ever saw this movie and plopped that in for Interstellar.
Or Taika Waititi with Thor: Love and Thunder, because Natalie Portman does the same exact thing.
Right, yeah. It was so great in that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Such a great film. But yeah, I generally would agree. I think, like I said, the first 2/3 of this is pretty stellar example of like sci-fi horror filmmaking with like the atmosphere that's built up in space. Even just like the look of like all this is happening like in the atmosphere of Neptune, which is perfect because Neptune has like this inherent like, oh, it's all stormy and stuff like that. So it's literally just like you're going on a dark, stormy night to this planet to go into this haunted house that is like this other spaceship that's in the middle of everything. And you build up like a lot of that atmosphere, and you build up a lot of the interesting chemistry with the cast. Even with like, you mentioned the Richard T. Jones's character. It's so weird how like during those first 2/3, he almost feels like he's trying to do kind of like a Denzel style charming performance. That's what he's like aiming for. And then the moment like part of the ship blows up and he gets like rocketed into space, and he has to be like, oh man, I gotta do something. Why all these things always happen to me? Let me completely dismantle my oxygen so I can fly over to the ship. The moment that happens, the movie takes the nosedive into like stupidity in a bummer way. And I think it still is like kind of fun for like some of the horror stuff that happens there. The flashes we see when like Fishburne is shown all the horrible things that happen in the hell dimension. There's still fun stuff there, but it doesn't really take a dive into like, oh, we have to completely like change the genre of this movie to add in the action elements.
Yeah, I agree. I never thought about it with the Richard T. Jones thing, but yeah, you're right. He's 100% like Denzel, cool, charming, slick Denzel, and then he becomes Will Smith in Men in Black.
I mean, not even, he becomes more like Chris Rock is like a supporting actor in like Lethal Weapon 4, honestly.
I was trying to be nice, but yeah, yeah. No, he definitely does.
Yes, but yeah, still solid movie overall. I would still say definitely W.S. Anderson's best. And, you know, if you haven't seen this one, check it out. It's pretty fun for what it is. But let's go ahead and go into our weekly segment, the Double Redo. Double Redo.
Double Redo. Double Redo. Double Redo. Double Redo. Double Redo.
That works. So the Double Redo is a segment that we do every week, in which Adam and I, in addition to talking about the two movies related to the topic, we recommend a good movie and dissuade you from watching a bad one related to the topic each. So Adam has a good and bad choice. I have a good and bad choice as well. So Adam, you're going first. What is your good and bad choices for this week's Double Redo about Mr. Laurence Fishburne?
All right, so for my good, I'm doing a television series instead of a movie, just because I think he's quite phenomenal in it, and he's playing a character that's been portrayed quite a few times, and I'd argue he's my favorite interpretation of the character. I have him as Jack Gross in Hannibal. I think the Hannibal show is the best telling of that whole story. I think he fits right in with why it's so good. He's super authoritative, and yet you could tell, like, he does have a soft spot for the main character, yet at the same time, like, he's not above playing dirty and using people to get sort of the job done. I think there's a lot of layers to that character that you've never really got the chance to see in any other iteration. It's some of the most disturbing television I've ever seen, and the fact that it was on a major network is crazy to me. It's just a fucking great show. If you haven't seen Hannibal, you got to see it. And then for my bad, I have a movie that I remember really liking when I first saw it. And it's sort of in the vein of a Hannibal Lecter type movie. I have the movie Just Cause that stars Laurence Fishburne, Sean Connery, Blair Underwood, and Ed Harris. And Ed Harris plays sort of a Hannibal Lecter type that is sort of helping Sean Connery, who's like a lawyer, and Fishburne, who's this like Southern cop. And they're trying to figure out who actually murdered this girl, and if they did get the right man that Blair Underwood was accused of, but he was confessed under horrible circumstances and blah, blah, blah. And really, the problem with it is, like, Fishburne is quite fun in it. Ed Harris is okay, he's trying. I love Ed Harris, but Ed Harris is a manic serial killer. As much as you might think you want it, might not work. It's just kind of a paint by the numbers Hannibal Lecter ripoff. Pretty much 100%. It feels like they sort of might have read Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs and sort of mixed the two. And I, of course, didn't know that when I first saw it as a kid because I didn't know all the material, but it just comes off incredibly, incredibly flat, sort of in every way. Like I said, Fishburne's pretty good in it, but that's about it. The rest is just kind of boring, bland, seen it 100 times, done better.
Yeah, I haven't seen Just Cause. It sounds kind of potentially interesting with like that cast, but then it seems like they kind of do nothing with that. As opposed to, I have seen all of Hannibal. I podcasted about Hannibal. I had a fucking like recap show I was doing back in the day of that show, and I think that show is tremendous. I think especially with Fishburne, like he's one of the few people who kind of captures what Jack Crawford sort of should be in terms of like these shows, which is like. Say like Silence of the Lambs captures this, and I think the original Manhunter kind of does as well, where like Jack Crawford's supposed to be a guy who is kind of like a sort of father figure for like the main character, but at the same time is constantly like got something else behind his back, where it's like, okay, you're trying to be like supportive, but I know it's because like there's some other element here that you're like keeping from me. It feels like it's because he's like inherently, because of his position, like he's guarded in some way from like actually fully embracing somebody as like an actual protege, like he is supposed to with like the Will Graham character. But yeah, I think Fishburne's tremendous, especially the relationship he has with Gina Torres, who at the time was his wife, who plays his wife on the show, is tremendous. Especially like as we sort of get to like season 3 and certain things happen with her character. I think he plays a lot of that so beautifully. But so for my Double Redo choices, I have 2 movies. One of them was actually your alternate good pick for this episode that we didn't end up going with. But at the same time, as I mentioned last episode, I'd heard so many good things about it, and you had, really praised it. Like when we were talking about something, like, you know what, I'm definitely going to catch up on this one. And I completely agree with you that it's not only a good pick, but a great pick of Deep Cover.
Yeah.
directed by Bill Duke, came out in 1992. Bill Duke, yes, of Predator fame. Bill Duke has a whole directing career that I was not really aware of until fairly recently. Like, oh, he directed Sister Act 2? Wow. Okay, go Bill Duke. But this is a movie in which, given the title, Fishburne plays an undercover cop who goes like deep undercover into trying to stop a drug ring, as ordered by his superior, who would end up directing Air Bud later on, Charles Martin Smith, who's amazing also in this movie. And he goes like deep undercover and starts trying to investigate like where exactly like all these drugs are coming in from, and he finds a main connection in the form of Jeff Goldblum, who is a guy who is a lawyer by day and a drug kingpin by night, basically. And the two of them strike a friendship and start kind of trying to, muscle out the other sort of suppliers out of the competition. And it's an incredible movie about, like, that is full of style and so much, like, the way that Fishburne interacts off of Goldblum, like, their chemistry is really fun. There's a lot of, like, bits where they, like, play off each other very well. But also, even just, like, the style of it is, like, really, like, shows off, like, oh, this is, like, a potentially alluring life as you, like, kind of rise up the ranks and become, like, so high in the drug kingpin world. But at the same time, this drug life is just as bad, if not maybe even, like, slightly less bad than the actual police element of it, where like all the scenes with like Fishburne and Charles Martin Smith just have so many layers of corruption that are coming off of Smith that are so good, like the dialogue bouncing off each other, like so tremendous, and like Fishburne just keeps going so deep, and especially like when they insinuate from the start, like we see his father getting horribly murdered after doing a lot of drugs and trying to rob a liquor store, and he's like, you know what, I don't want to be that. I've never had a drink, I've never done any drugs. But as he starts going down, he just realizes, like, oh man, even if I didn't do that, I became a part of the police system that completely destroys people anyway. Like, I wanted to make a difference, but it turns out, oh, no matter where I go down, I'm gonna be an asshole, so fuck it. I'm gonna go with the way that's, like, more glamorous and start doing coke and shit. It is such a, like, weirdly tragic, but still incredibly investing sort of cop drama story that I would love to cover on the show at some point in full detail. It's an amazing movie, for sure, and I'd recommend everybody out there see it. It's on the Criterion Collection, everybody. And then for my bad pick, I have one that Fishburne isn't in a lot, and I don't even think this is like a terrible movie necessarily, but I think because of even its misuse of Fishburne is kind of the point where this movie I'm very uneven on dips into like a movie I don't like. Like there was some early potential in it, but with Predators, you have the initial interesting setup for this third Predator movie of like, oh, all these guys like are put down on this planet that feels very similar to the jungle environment of the original movie, and they're all different prisoners who don't know each other and are just kind of like plopped in here, and that's an interesting setup. But I think as it goes along, it starts like really losing me with like some of its elements of like particularly like the different characters, the different castings. I think Adrian Brody's kind of terrible in this movie, quite frankly, and even the stuff they do with Topher Grace's character I feel is kind of interesting, but I don't think he's that good of an actor to kind of pull it off. But really the moment where the movie loses me is this big chunk where Fishburne appears in a scene I'm very convinced was originally written for like Arnold Schwarzenegger as Dutch to reprise his role from the first movie.
It was.
Yeah, there was some, like, they've never said, like, that specifically is what it was, but they have said at certain points, like, oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger was supposed to have a cameo in this movie, but then it didn't happen, and then the Laurence Fishburne character happens, and I'm like, I wonder which role Arnold Schwarzenegger would have played in this movie. Maybe the guy who's dealt with a bunch of predators and is, like, driven insane. And, I think Fishburne's committing to it, but I just think, like, that is really the point where I start really losing out on the movie. And it, like, any of, like, the potential interesting stuff that happens after that, like, with the guy who has, like, the katana and stuff like that, it feels like just, like, more wasted potential to me than anything else. And which is, like, for the Predators franchise, there's definitely a lot more of just, like, this is a bad idea with an interesting character. As opposed to, there's a lot of interesting good ideas here that just kind of, like, I think flop apart. So it's not a terrible movie, but I think Predators is kind of, like, a disappointing entry in that franchise for me.
Obviously, I've seen Deep Cover. You said quite a bit of what I would have said. I just think it's fucking great. I think Fishburne and Goldblum also work really well off each other. It's one I really want to talk about on the show too. It's pretty fucking great. And then Predators, we've kind of talked here and there about this movie before. I do like it. I think it's probably my third favorite in the franchise. The Topher Grace and the Laurence Fishburne of it all, for me, especially those two, are kind of what has always kept me from really loving it. I think it's a completely wasted Laurence Fishburne. I think the character alone is kind of stupid. And the Topher Grace, I mean, it's telegraphed a mile away what that character is, but I think somebody with more capability could have made it more fun, to where like we know, but really played with the idea that nobody else does, and he cannot pull it off. So yeah, I think it's definitely a flawed movie. I mean, we saw finally return to form with Prey. Hopefully, we get more of like that. But yeah, I mean, I agree.
But I don't think I need to underline this element of it. The uncanny valley of buff Adrian Brody is like upsetting as like the lead character of that movie. It's just like that doesn't feel real to me. I'm just like, this doesn't, like, he's not a guy who should be buff. He needs to be like rail skinny thin. Him buff is just weird.
It is weird, but I thought he was fine. Was he great? No, but I thought he was fine.
Well, on that note, let's go ahead and repeat our titles for everybody out there in case you want to add some of them to your watch list or remove them off if you had one of the bad ones on here. Adam.
For my good, I had the Hannibal television series from NBC. And for my bad, I had Just Cause.
And then for my good pick, I had Deep Cover. And for my bad pick, I had Predators. But now, let's start winding down the show. But stay tuned. At the very end, we'll be picking our picks for next week's episode for that, so stay tuned. But first, we want to thank some people. Like, of course, we want to thank Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used for our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thorlally for our artwork. Find his stuff on various socials under the username Night of Water. That's night with a K, _of_water. And thanks, of course, to our patrons at patreon.com/DEDBpod, where for just $1 a month, you all get to help us, keep the lights on, but also you get bonus podcasts. Like, for example, by the end of the month, we'll be having our March Madness on the best animated film of all time, popping up there by the end of the month. And then you also get to vote in polls for individual movies we cover, like Osmosis Jones. You all picked that as our bad pick here in a poll. And then also you get to vote for topics we cover. And this week, this episode's coming out, we'll be having our April topic poll up, where you all get to pick which topic we do by the end of the month of next month, April. And it's going to tie in, interestingly, to that George Foreman biopic that, if you've seen the trailers for, is a real movie. It feels like it's a fake movie.
Oh, God, it looks so dumb. It looks
really bad. Looks like a really bad one. But we're going to tie in because you all get to choose if we cover one of these two topics that tie in with that particular movie, either biopics, so biographical pictures about real-life people, which we've never somehow done as a topic. We've done plenty of biopics as individual movies, but never as an entire topic before. Or the alternate choice for another actor, and one of our favorites, who was in the big George Foreman movie, Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah, I'm good with either on those. Biopics for sure, I'm leaning towards, but I'm not going to turn down a good Forrest Whitaker.
Look, we love talking about Forrest. Forrest Whitaker is one of the more fun actors working today, honestly.
He's the shit, dude. He's so
even in that fucking trailer for Big George Foreman, it's just like, oh, you know what, George, you're gonna be the greatest one possible. And then you got the actor playing George Foreman, like, okay,
I know,
sure,
oh, God.
I'll do that.
Yep. It's so bad.
So you all get to pick. That poll will come up the Wednesday after this comes out, and you all get to vote in that poll if you're a patron for just that $1. And for more of us, find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at DEDBpod. And you can also submit feedback to us either on those channels or on our email, doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And for more of me, find me specifically on Twitter and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy. And also I do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com.
And I'm on the internet in some places. You can find me or don't. It doesn't matter.
If you can search for him. If you can find him.
I think everything I got is set to private, so good luck.
Even Letterboxd? I don't know if you can private Letterboxd.
No, but nobody cares.
If you do care to listen to us further, please, follow and subscribe to us on places like Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms, wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you're listening on the Talk Film Society podcast network, why not listen to all the other great shows on the network? And also, you can dig into our archives and our Podbean main feed for like nearly 200 episodes before we even joined TFS. And everything else, if you can't support us on the Patreon for the $1, that's cool. We totally get it. Money can be tight for some people. The completely free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around because it gets us more visibility out there in the deep, vast emptiness of space.
And the deep, vast emptiness of Twitter, which is scarier than Event Horizon.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I would rather be sucked into the vacuum of space than the vacuum of Twitter.
Yeah,
certain days.
100%. Yep.
Just bleed from my eyes. Like, at least I can't look at more Elon tweets.
Yep. Or random film discourse and then, hey, wow, porn. What the fuck?
I know, that part's kind of fun, depending on the source.
It's kind of fun. It's interesting.
Well, now, Adam, it's time we did our picking for next week's episode. Yes, at the end of every episode, Adam and I pick a good and a bad pick based on one of us has 2 good picks, one of us has 2 bad picks, and we assign numbers between 1 and 10 for each of those. And the other person picks a number between 1 and 10, and whatever that number is closest to gets us our good and our bad features. So, for example, Adam will be having the bad picks for this. I could say, I'm going to pick number, say, 8, and he'll be like, okay, that's closest to number 9, which is this particular choice. And that gets us our bad pick. Same thing with the good picks. And keep in mind, Adam has the Godfather rule still in effect, where he has a veto that he got last May, and he has to use that by this coming May for our anniversary episode. It's a use it or lose it kind of thing, where if he hears one of my good choices, he could potentially say, like, you know what, I don't want to cover that movie, and say, actually, I'll take the cannoli. And thus that choice is gone, and we have to go with whatever other choice is available. And this episode for next week was chosen by our patrons, once again, patreon.com/DEDBpod, where with that covering, past years in film, and we noticed we hadn't done any from, like, the 2010s that weren't, like, from when we were doing the show, starting in 2018. So, we asked you between the years 2015 and then the ultimate winner of 2012, so films from the year 2012 is our discussion point. Should be interesting, especially since I noticed when we were putting this poll together, we've only covered about 5 movies from that year in the entire history of our show.
And there's a lot of them.
There are a lot. It's very true. And like I said, I have the good picks, you have the bad picks, Adam. So for my 2 good picks, please pick a number between 1 and 10.
Oh, man. All right. I will go with number 2.
Okay. At number 3, I have a movie that I'm kind of cheating here in terms of this came out in the
fuck.
Well, hold on. It came out in most territories, including the native country of this particular filmmaker, in 2012. Didn't come out in the States until 2013. But I'm going with it, if nothing else, because it's one of my favorite movies of that decade, and it's from a source who recently just won an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. I have Sarah Polley's Stories We Tell.
Oh, Jesus. I can honestly say I don't know if I've seen it. So I will not take the cannoli, just because if I haven't seen something, I try to stick with it. So, all right, yeah, let's go for it. So, you know what? Yeah, let's go for it.
Well, on the other side of things, at number 9, I had a movie that I think is very underrated, especially in terms of like sort of horror sequels. It's one of my favorites, especially for a movie that the original I wasn't a huge fan of, but I think the sequel is a huge improvement. And one of the better examples of sort of like that kind of torture porny era, I have The Collection.
Oh, I like The Collection quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah, I'm good though. I like going with the one I haven't seen, but yeah, I like The Collection quite a bit. I hope we eventually get the third one. I think it filmed. I don't know, but
no, there was a whole thing where they started filming, then COVID happened, and then apparently like the producers stopped talking to the filmmakers. So apparently,
okay.
Yeah, that's literally what happened. So I don't think we're getting that third one anytime soon.
It doesn't sound like it.
No, but Adam, for your 2 bad picks, I'm gonna pick 1.
All right, at number 1, I have a movie I have never seen because it looks so fucking stupid, but it's got a lot of big actors in it. Directed by James McTeague, a John Cusack starring Edgar Allan Poe detective movie, The Raven.
Oh, I have not seen The Raven, but I heard disastrous things about that. Okay.
Yeah, I gotta do it.
Okay. So that's interesting. You haven't seen you haven't seen either of the picks. I haven't seen this bad pick.
I haven't seen either. No, at number 10, I had one of the most infamous bombs of all time, but one that I don't really hate that much. I had John Carter.
Yeah, I think John Carter's all right. I would never say it's like a bad movie necessarily. I think it just got an unfortunate rap because, hey, we're going to adapt this 100-year-old story that influenced all the other things that have been made since then. And everyone was like, oh, this kind of looks like Star Wars.
And we're also not going to call it by its full title.
Right, not call it by its full title, release it in March, kind of just to do every disservice possible.
And get a walking sheet of drywall for the lead.
To poor Taylor Kitsch. The tragedy of the Taylor Kitsch career is fascinating. Truly like a Greek tragedy for our modern time. The career of Taylor Kitsch. But all right, so Stories We Tell and The Raven. Should be a lot of fun next time. But until then, everybody, just make sure, you don't go in spooky houses and you don't board spooky spaceships. I keep telling people this all the time. Don't do it.
For the love of God, stay away from Bill Murray for several reasons.
The true horror. Don't enter that vessel either.
Yeah, good God.